views and opinions expressed do not necessarily reflect those of Access Fort Wayne, the Allen County Public Library, or any other supporting groups. If you'd like to produce a show, call us at 260-421-1250.
Let me be your lighthouse so I can show you the way. Let me be your shining light, I'll keep you from drifting away. I'm the one that makes you try when...
It was a long time in coming. From the Women's Rights Convention in 1848 in Seneca Falls, New York, to the passage of the 19th Amendment in August of 1920, women in the United States fought for the right to vote. Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton. These were two of the early leaders of the movement. They and others like them thought and fought for the right of women to have a say in the government of the people, by the people, and for the people. But male politicians, knowing that women had little influence over their actions, and thus the legislation that they passed, or didn't, continued to ignore women and their efforts to exact change in our society. At the turn of the 20th century, heading into what is now known as the progressive era in American history, women organized and created two groups who vocally and publicly declared that women should be allowed to vote. The National American Women's Suffrage Association was actually formed in 1890 and led over the next 20 years, first by Anthony, then Carrie Chapman Catt, and finally Anna Howard Shaw. It was the forerunner of today's League of Women Voters. A more militant group was the National Woman's Party, NWP, under the leadership of Alice Paul. They have the distinction of being the first group of Americans to picket the White House. The combined efforts of the two groups led to the passage of the 19th Amendment, seen as the largest extension of voting rights in our nation's history. But the effort was not without its flaws. Black women were discriminated against because leaders feared reprisal from white Southerners. In 1913, Black suffragettes were relegated to the end of a suffrage parade in Washington, D.C. The National American Woman Suffrage Association would not include black women or their suffrage groups in their work, but black women fought back, founding the National Association of Colored Women in 1896 in Washington, D.C. Mary Church Terrell, born in 1864 to former slaves, was their leader and went on to help found the NAACP in 1909. Black women faced both racism and sexism, but they weren't about to give up on gaining their rightful place among voters. Ida B. Wells, a journalist and anti-lynching advocate, helped found the Alpha Suffrage Club in 1913 in Chicago. In her speech, Ain't I a Woman, at the 1858 Women's Convention in Akron, Ohio, Sojourner Truth put forth the idea that gender equality and an end to slavery were partners in making a more perfect union. All of these women knew in their hearts and minds that voting is important. Do you? When you vote, you do more than select your favorite candidate for a particular office. Those elected need to be people who have the best interests of the people in mind. Voting means you're taking an active part in deciding issues related to healthcare, immigration, equal opportunity, voting rights, infrastructure, jobs, education, Social Security, neighborhood safety, taxes, and more. Don't waste this opportunity. Want a say in how your tax money is spent? Vote. Elected officials now may be making decisions that affect your future. Want to voice your opinion about that? Vote. Climate change, healthcare, care about them? Vote. Education is supported by tax dollars and needs to be monitored by the people. One way to do that? Vote. You have the right to be a part of the political decision-making process. Don't underestimate what an enormous privilege this is. We, the people, the voters, can only have a representative democracy that functions positively for us if we vote. Democracy is not a spectator sport. We could go on and on, but we won't. We'll simply close with this. You can register online at indianavoters.com. You'll need a driver's license or government ID. You can also register at various events around town. You can find out more about candidates for offices in our area and on the state and national scene at vote411.org. The deadline to register to vote in this fall's election is Monday, October 5th. Get registered, learn about the issues, and get out there and vote. Don't let Granny down.
This is Patty Hunter of Patty's Page. Thank you for coming on to view my show. This special guest is today Betsy Kachmar. She's a membership chairperson right now for League for Women Voters. That was hard to say.
I know. Well, LWVFW is even harder to say, and that's the League of Women Voters of the Fort Wayne area.
How many are there?
League of Women Voters groups. In Indiana, I think there are about 10 or 15 at least. And then, of course, nationwide, there are thousands around the country. It's a national organization. So there are lots and lots.
So when was this formed?
So the League of Women Voters in the United States was formed right after women got the right to vote by a lot of the same women who had worked very hard to earn that right. So for about 70 years, women had fought for the right to vote in the United States. And then 100 years ago, they were granted that right. And so right after that time, people sort of shifted gears and said, okay, well, we've spent all this time trying to get the right to vote. Now we need to focus on making sure that people vote smart. And so they switched to voter education and voter engagement to make sure that people knew that they could vote and then knew how to make good choices on the candidates.
The 19th Amendment, what is that about and when was it passed? The same year the League was formed, or?
Yeah, so soon right after the League was formed. So the amendment took a while to get put into place. So the way amendments work at the national level is that both the House and the Senate and the president all have to agree to adding it to the Constitution. And then all of the states in the Union have to ratify it. So it has to pass at every state level as well. And so as you can imagine, that would take a long time now. And it, took a long time then because they had to, get it, get the information out to everybody and then get it done. So, so by midsummer of 1920, 45 states had ratified the 19th Amendment, 8 had rejected it, and 3 were refusing to consider it. So North Carolina and Tennessee were still up in the air, but North Carolina was sure to reject it. So this left only Tennessee as the only state as a possible 36th state in order to ratify it. Indiana had ratified it already, and that was an interesting process too. It took them several tries here in Indiana, to get it passed, but it did. So it all rested on Tennessee.
Right.
And it was all a very close vote in Tennessee as well. And so, history lore has it that the mother of one of the Tennessee legislators wrote to her son, and she said, I don't know, Jimmy, you better vote this in because I want to vote. And he changed his vote because his mother said so. And the rest is history. So the day that we mark is the day that basically that Tennessee ratified the amendment and then allowed it to become part of the Constitution. So, of course, a lot of women worked very hard to make that happen. And one of the other big controversies, earlier on in the process was certainly the goal was to make sure that all women had the right to vote. And as you can imagine, back in that time, there was some concern about allowing African American women the right to vote. And that was a tough, decision. African American women had worked very hard alongside everyone to try and make this happen. And then kind of at the last minute, it was decided that it didn't appear to be any way for it to pass, with that included. And so that kind of got left out. And it really wasn't until the Civil Rights Act that African American men and women were allowed to vote. And, that's a little bit more recent history. So some of us remember that more clearly, and the controversy along with that. And one could argue that still today, there are a lot of barriers to being able to vote now. Even though the rights have been given, there have been certainly a lot of voter suppression activities that went on in the past. If you've ever watched, movies about that time, Selma or, any of the other important historical recollections of that time, people were turned away for pretty bogus reasons and not allowed to vote. And that can still happen today. And so that's really one of the reasons why the League of Women Voters works very hard at making sure that people know their rights and know what the rules are. We're getting ready. Well, we're in the middle of an election right now. And so a lot of time is being spent to make sure that the poll workers know the rules and of course, to make sure that the people who are voting know the rules in case the poll workers make a mistake and don't remember the rules correctly. One of the things that has struck me just recently is in Indianapolis, there are very few early voting places. In Fort Wayne, we have now 5. We just had another 4 open up today. And so we have 5 locations for a community the size of Fort Wayne and Allen County. Yes. And we had, our Allen County voter or election board moved to the Coliseum, and has been open for several weeks for early voting. And the lines have been long. And people have, I think, reported waiting for an hour and a half, maybe 2 hours in Indianapolis to vote early. The lines have been 8 hours, 6 to 8 hours that they have to wait. And it's because they don't have very many early voting locations. And the reason they don't have very many is because the election board has to vote unanimously to create more opportunity to vote. And one person out of the 3-person board has consistently voted against it. And therefore, they are not offering more sites for a area the size of Marion County, which is by far the largest area in the state. Yeah. Conversely, in surrounding counties like Hamilton County, their election board said, sure, let's open up some more. So those waits just across the border of the county are much shorter in surrounding counties around Marion County, and of course here in Fort Wayne. So we are thankful that our election board is, working together and allowing people to wait a relatively reasonable amount of time to vote early.
A non-governmental organization, something about your official observer of the elections.
There are observers. There are people who, so at a polling place, at least on election day, I know, there are people who serve as monitors or something like that. And they are specially trained in order to make sure that everything's going well, and they go from polling place to polling place and make sure that things are set up well and there aren't any problems and that sort of thing. There are also people that are kind of line monitors that stand outside or inside, wherever the lines are. And usually that is, both parties provide people to fill that role. And at least the training that I sat in on here locally really emphasized, just making sure that that the people that were serving as the line monitors, and all poll workers know what the rules are and help enforce them. So, like, one of the rules is that you are not allowed to wear candidates' clothing or
colors,
certain party-related buttons or things. Candidates can't have yard signs or anything within a certain distance of the polling location, and so these monitors would help and make sure that people were following those rules, and maybe sort of just let people know kind of how things are going and how long the wait would be from that particular distance. And in our current environment, oftentimes they're handing out plastic gloves for people. We did this at the primary as well, so that the people who are touching the pen in order to sign in on the poll books and who are pushing the buttons on the machines, even though there's a lot of sanitizing going on, it's difficult to do it between every person. And so, the gloves help make sure that there's not a transfer of germs, helps protect the poll workers, which I appreciate. So you're handing out gloves, making sure people get their I voted stickers and that sort of thing. So it's mostly a helpful process. And if they see something that they think is inappropriate, they can report that to other officials at the polling location.
So they have to wear masks, mandatory.
Masks are mandatory, yes. And there are masks available at each polling location if people forget theirs. But again, that's, for everyone's safety, we try to make sure that the poll workers that are giving their time to assist people to vote and other people waiting in line are not injured while they are trying to exercise their right to vote. Hi, Kitty.
Vegas. My cat.
It's a very pretty cat.
He wants to settle down. Anyways, how to conduct a home interview. He's helping supervise this.
Yes. Well, it's good to have an active participant that's supervising there.
You educate.
The League of Women Voters do educate. We've tried our best. It's a little difficult this year because a lot of the events where we would normally go out and have a table and do voter registration and provide voter rights information are canceled, or we're not comfortable being in large groups, being a relatively older group of women, and we're also trying to be careful too. So so we've really relied, just like everybody else, on social media, Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. We had some high school kids helping us with that because, that's the, they're the professionals. They're the experts. And so we had Naomi and a couple friends of hers from Canterbury School put together a really nice PowerPoint video that they wrote pretty much on their own and produced, and it's up on our League of Women Voters website. It's lwvfw.org, and you can go check that out. Just trying to help new voters, kids that are 18 that are maybe voting for the first time, young adults, not really kids anymore, I guess, and anyone that just needs a refresher on why it's important to vote, the process of voting, how, what the rules are, and how to engage in that process, especially if you're a first-time voter and not familiar with how it works. And so there's they've embedded some videos from the election board on how to use a voting machine and that sort of thing. So it's really a very helpful refresher for anybody that either hasn't voted recently or hasn't voted at all, or just wants to be reminded of
So you encourage.
how it works. One of the things that I like about it too is that they kind of try to, in their process of talking about why to vote, one of the reasons that people don't vote is because they think their vote doesn't matter or doesn't count or won't be counted.
It really does.
And so one of the things that they talk about is different elections in the history where a very few votes really made a difference. And so one that they brought up was our Mayor Tom Henry. When he was first running for city council, he was in a very close race, and actually on a recount, he won by just 2 or 3 votes.
Wow.
So, had he not won that race, he might not have continued to pursue a public career and may not have been mayor of Fort Wayne. Yeah. So, that's made a big difference in our community and in his life and ours. And so there's lots of examples, even on a larger scale, at the national level, where, just a very few votes, 1 or 2 per precinct has just made all the difference in the world in terms of who wins and who loses. So your vote does count.
So people-powered fair maps.
Yes, people-powered fair maps. So, so let me start at the census because that's really where it begins. When we talk about fair maps have to do with redistricting, and redistricting has to do with how many people live in the district. And so this is an important year for a lot of reasons, but one of the reasons it's important is that this is a census year. And so many people, hopefully everyone listening, had filled out a census. And this was the first time that people could automatically do it online. And so that's been interesting as well. But anyway, and then there's been a lot of controversy about when they were going to stop the census count. Because of COVID, lots of things have, not happened the way people thought they were going to happen. And the census taking was one of those things. And so relatively early on this year, people thought that it was important to extend the deadline for collecting that information to make sure that it was accurate. And so it was going to be extended through past the original deadline, and then people would have more time. Well, people were arguing, no, that isn't necessary. We don't need to, do that. And so back and forth. So this last couple of months, nobody has really known until the very last minute when it was going to even be over. But they've declared it to be done. And so now they're in the process of verifying the data. That data will be distributed to the Congress, and then the Congress will decide how to divide up the districts. and that it will be true at the state level as well. So one of the things that is impacted by that, of course, is dividing up the districts can be done in a whole lot of different ways. And so what people often try to do is divide it up in such a way that they can win if they're in charge. And that's true for Democrats and Republicans. It's sort of human nature. They want to be able to keep their seats for the people that are currently serving, or they want to make sure that their party gets to keep control and power. And so one of the things that League of Women Voters and a lot of other citizen-oriented organizations have been working hard on is to offer an alternative where citizens can be part of that process of drawing the lines so that it could be fairer. And so that it needs, that it be done in such a way that is more equitable. Yes.
What would you like to say to my audience to encourage them?
Oh, to encourage them? Well, there are other groups besides League of Women Voters that are certainly interested in voter education. And it's been neat this year to see a lot of things just sort of pop up in terms of people encouraging people to become active in this election. I hope that after the election is over, people will continue to stay engaged in whatever capacity they want to. If some of these other groups continue to exist and can kind of refocus on redistricting or some other issue that's still going to be coming up, or addressing some of continuing concerns even after the election. There's lots of policy to be made. So many other things will require people's attention, be it schools, the environment, gun control, equity issues. There's thousands and thousands of decisions that are made daily on all of these things that affect us. So certainly the League of Women Voters will be here next year and beyond to encourage people to stay engaged, or other organizations that may attract you as well. And I would say, we are stronger together. So together as an organization like the League of Women Voters that also then networks very tightly with other organizations, many voices make a strong voice together, and can help speak out for people who maybe feel like they don't have a voice. And I think that's equally important.
We're all equal.
Yeah, right. Well, and not everybody has time to spend paying attention to, policy wonk stuff or participating in community activities. So to the extent that we can listen to one another and speak for one another, I think that's important as well.
This is Patty Hunter of Patty's Page. Thank you for joining us this week, and God bless. We'll see you next week.
Godspeed, my love, until we meet again. You're always in my heart and every dream. Don't let this time apart give in to all our fears. God will keep us close from up above. So until we meet again, Godspeed, my love. God is with us always for the rest of our lives.